Hello, this is the European cinema in the 1930s. This era was dominated by the Great Depression. Even though 25% of the Americans were unemployed, this time caused some of the best films to be produced. With Hitler's rise to power, many Jewish Germans in the film industry got the out of Germany. One half-Jewish director, Fritz Lang, who made the Nibelungen Saga and Metropolis, were both coincidentally Hitler's favorite movies. Hitler requested Lang to make the German film. Dozens of Jewish writers and directors and actors left as well. One director, Max Ophüls, he worked with love stories. He had a common style of graceful tracking shots. He directed in Germany, Italy, France, and the US. His first masterpiece was entitled Libelli in 1933. It was a throbbing melodrama where a lieutenant falls in love with a woman who's already in love with a baron. So why not? They duel and the lieutenant dies and the woman commits suicide. Everybody wins. This theme he uses again and again, I guess, of people dueling and suicide. He frequently uses a circular narrative structure in many of his movies. An example of this would be, I think it's called The Earrings, where a man buys earrings for his wife who has to sell them to pay one of her debts, and once he finds out about this, he buys them back for her, and she sells them again, which eventually leads to some guy buying them from her and then coincidentally falling in love with her and then giving her the earrings. So he uses fate, which is one of his other themes, and he eventually becomes exiled from Germany, which leaves German film cinema with a lot less artists. I mean, just thinking about the Holocaust and how many great films were just basically killed because of the Nazis. It was just such a terrible time. Filmmakers really got it the worst. Over in Great Britain, it was basically very theater-oriented. Then the British documentary movement of the 1930s came, kind of designed to take film back to the Lumiere brothers. A socialist/film critic named John Grierson was convinced at the time that film was being misused and that it should be a medium of change, especially with the Depression. And some movies that he rebelled against were actually the works of Alexander Korda, who had some pretty good ones. He was a visually sophisticated filmmaker with a sure touch with actors. He made The Private Life of Henry VIII, which was the first worldwide hit from England. It's actually led audiences and investors to discover British cinema, which led to a significant increase in productions from that area. Then the amazing Alfred Hitchcock came along. He began as an art director, but slowly worked his way up to an actual director. At the age of 26, his first film was directed, entitled The Pleasure Garden. He was an innovator in sound, where his 1929 production, Blackmail, began as a silent film, but eventually was reformed to be Britain's very first talkie. Overall, he made 24 British films, which kind of lacked the passion for his work, but it was only really building up to his true masterpieces formed in the US. We go over to France, we check out director Jean Cocteau. He was a Renaissance man. He worked in several other areas such as literature, theater, poetry, and painting. His first film, The Blood of a Poet. After that, he left directing for 15 years. He eventually returned with Beauty and the Beast and Orpheus. Another director, Michael Carne. His work generally consisted of existentialism and film noir. And then Jean Renoir was a pilot in World War I. Came out of that with a permanent limp. He embarked for the profession of a potter until Chaplin and von Stroheim persuaded him to consider cinema. To finance his first movies himself, his first one, he sold his father's painting for a budget. He wasn't very successful with silent films, but his talkies were very good. He was well known for warm humanism. His first talkie was entitled La Chiena, which was translated as the. Another of his bigger hits would be The Grand Illusion in 1937, which actually featured Erich von Stroheim. And a later masterpiece came with The Rules of the Game in 1939. Amazingly, this movie consisted of only 50 shots, which I find kind of hard to believe, but still, it is the 30s. Here's a quote from a film critic, Richard Roud. "If France were destroyed tomorrow, and nothing remained but this film. The whole country and its civilization could be constructed from it. So that is still pretty amazing though.